Okay, let's go. So, hello everyone. Welcome. My name is Romain Crozet. I'm the Programs Director of Climate Change Association. I would like to thank the UNFCCC for giving the opportunity to Climate Change to present, to organize this side event within the Africa Climate Week 2021. Today's event is the title of today's event is Climate Change Coalitions Boosting Ambitious Locally Led Climate Actions Across Africa. We received almost 300 inscriptions for this side event. So hopefully many of you are connecting today. Before starting, I will present today's speakers. So we have Kate Strachan. She works as a professional officer on climate change and coastal management at ICLEI Africa, based in Cape Town, South Africa. We have Shivam Gai, policy and advocacy officer at SLOCAT. We have Charlène Kwasi, Director of the Observatory for African Mobility, based in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, and Abdelrahman Meleji, GIS Project Manager, Transport for Cairo in Egypt. So thank you all for being here today and for your availability. All of you were involved somehow with the Climate Change Summit, which took place a few days ago virtually. And so we really look forward to continuing our collaboration with your organizations on the road to COP26, but also our next Climate Change Summit, which will take place in Dakar in September 2022. I will just explain very quickly what is Climate Change. Climate Change is a platform, an open platform of non-state actors on climate action, basically. So we try to create an enabling environment for climate action. And in this environment, we put together actors from local authorities, from business, from research, youth organizations, women's organizations, basically all the major groups that the UNFCCC recognizes, the 9 major groups. So we try to create an environment where those actors can better collaborate, exchange good practices, exchange information, know-how, in order to strengthen climate action. And we have this special focus on Africa. That's why we are here today. Climate Change has been organizing since 2015 summits every year. And since 2018, we have summits dedicated to African actors. So we had the first African summit in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, then Accra. And in 2020, we were supposed to gather in Kigali, together with ICLEI Africa, actually. But obviously, we had to cancel because of the pandemic. And this year, 2021, we were almost managing to have our event presentially in Dakar. And again, we had to postpone. That's why I said that hopefully we will meet again next year in Dakar. So we had to postpone the presential part, but we kept virtual mobilization. And before giving the floor to some of the actors involved in this in climate change platform who are here, I would like to give some figures about our last Climate Change Summit Africa 2021. So it was held between the 15th and 17th of September, entirely online. We were surprised by the interest around even this virtual event, because we had about 5,000 registrants, and in the end, 2,500 participants who actually engaged with this summit online, representing more than 80 countries, including more than 40 African countries. So it was a big gathering. We, as always, before the summit, we opened a call for proposal. So we collected about 250 good practices from African actors. And so this allowed us to reinforce our mapping of good practices in terms of climate action at the African level. So you can see on our website, there is this cartography, this mapping of good practices. And also this year, because we couldn't invite those people who contributed to the presential event, we proposed them to record videos. And we were surprised again by how responsive and active were our community. We got about 50 videos from local actors. And again, you can see on our website, on the webpage of the summit, there is this pitch corner part with more than 50 videos of very inspiring good practices from different sectors. So yeah, this event was really astonishing, with like high-level speakers, obviously from African cities such as Dakar or Lagos, business leaders from startups to bigger companies, community leaders, representatives of the UNFCCC also. So yeah, it was a very intense but interesting event, and everything was recorded, so you can obviously have access to all the sessions online, both in French and English. Even though today we are doing everything in English, we try most of the time to have at least French and English live interpretation, and even Portuguese for some sessions of the Covenant of Mayors, for example. Some of the key messages I wanted to bring here from that mobilization of the summit, there were some common strong messages that came out from the actors. We saw that the future of international climate action depends also on the access to vaccines in Africa. So basically the idea is that if without COVID solidarity, there is no possible climate solidarity. This was one strong idea which was raised. Also, it was very clear to everyone that the health crisis linked to the COVID-19 pandemic is also an environmental crisis. Hence, the importance of the link between climate and biodiversity. We also saw that just like the European recovery plan, if I might say, economic recovery policies in Africa must be accompanied by the necessary climate and energy transition. So it's really important to think recovery plan taking into account climate and energy transition. And last point, we also found interesting one aspect, which for us as a platform of non-state actors is really, really interesting, is that we are probably reaching a tipping point as the practice of climate action seems to be evolving from a project-based approach to another approach, which is more and more systemic. So taking into account the whole environment to fund projects in a more systemic way. So this is really encouraging, and that's something we wanted to highlight also. I'm not going to take longer for my introduction. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. If we will try to take time at the end of this 1 hour event to answer some of the questions. I want now to give the floor to Kate Strachan from ICLEI Africa. So yeah, ICLEI Africa was very active in many sessions during the Climate Change Summit, including mobility, adaptation, water, but also the Covenant of Mayors annual conference. So thank you for being with us, Kate. And could you please share with us some of the main messages that came out from the Covenant of Mayors conference that took place during the summit? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. And it's a really great honor to be here and share with you some of these insights. Just to note that ICLEI Africa hosts the Covenant of Mayors Sub-Sahara Secretariat, and today I represent the Covenant of Mayors Sub-Sahara Secretariat as the coordinator of the Secretariat, and yeah, also known as COMSA. And the COMSA Secretariat recently co-hosted our virtual COMSA Day at the Climate Change Summit that focused on a variety of topics related to climate action plans and unlocking climate finance for sustainable infrastructure, climate change adaptation, energy access, nature-based solutions, just to mention a few. And during our COMSA Day event, we also co-hosted 2 technical sessions which focused on the sharing of experiences related to the implementation of sustainable energy access and climate action plans known as CEACAPs, as well as how to mainstream nature-based solutions into local planning activities. Regarding the CEACAPs, I think one of the main messages that came out of this session included the importance of having focused, clear, and specific actions in these CEACAPs, as this makes it easier to take forward to the implementation phase, as well as to unlocking climate finance. Our speakers also highlighted the role of involving local community throughout the process, in addition to ensuring that all stakeholders are fully involved, and this included women and vulnerable communities. The emphasis on balancing nature and economic needs when mainstreaming nature-based solutions into city planning was also discussed during our sessions, which touched on how this can increase the overall resilience of resources in cities. I think what became clear to us from our technical sessions was that there's a need for continued support from local communities, implementing organizations, funders, partners, as well as local and national governments to ensure that there's momentum of implementing climate action plans at this local level, and ensuring climate considerations are embedded in all city planning policies, that they're not just standalone climate action plans, but actually other departments also uptake this need for climate consideration. And this will ultimately hopefully ensure resilient and sustainable development. So I think, yeah, those are just a few of the highlights.
Thank you, Kate. I wanted to ask you, because actually the Covenant of Mayors initiative, let's say, is very concrete and comes with support from the EU to climate plans for cities, African cities. And those plans, I wanted to ask you, how are they being delivered if the cities are managing to keep working on their climate plan due to the current situation we have been into for already a year and a half? I mean, so how is it going at the local level within the municipalities?
Thanks so much. Great question. I think what is exciting is that we're still delivering, and cities are still developing these action plans at a local level. And we have a number of partner organizations working with different cities in different countries who are delivering on these climate action plans. And we have seen in the last year and a bit 10 CEACAPs coming to finalization, and having received, and we've seen, I think something like 611 city officials having received training in 38 instances in the past short while. So we are seeing momentum. We know that the technical help desk of COMSA provides technical support to over 260 local governments across Sub-Saharan Africa region. And this support covers the entire journey from the development of their baseline studies to their risk and vulnerability assessments, as well as their access to energy assessments, target setting, action planning. And a lot of the support is being provided virtually through virtual and hybrid workshops. So we are seeing momentum still. I think a lot of cities have realized the importance of these climate action plans, given the current COVID situation in many of our cities, and the importance to be prepared for future climate emergencies, may it be climate emergencies. So we are seeing momentum still, even though COVID has been a huge part of many of our cities.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you maybe one more question about this, like how did local governments act in terms of prioritizing their action when you have a pandemic and the economy slowing down because of that pandemic, and then the climate change issues in a broader plan, let's say? How do they prioritize? Is climate action still at the forefront, or how is it balanced? If you can, I don't know if you can give one answer for all the African continent, but maybe some ideas.
Yeah, I don't think I can give one answer for the whole African continent, but I think we're seeing that cities are realizing the importance of being prepared, and the need for systems to be in place. I mean, a lot of our cities were caught unaware with the COVID pandemic and didn't have systems in place to deal with such an emergency. And I think the reality is, and our cities are starting to see that climate change is real. Events take place unexpectedly, flooding, droughts, cyclones, that sort of thing. And there's a need to be prepared. We're seeing many parts of the African continent dealing with water restrictions, that sort of thing. And I think it's a realization that we need to be prepared in the future, that we can't just deal with this when it happens, in the situation of COVID. So I think they're starting to see that there needs to be a balance. Yes, we need to deal with COVID, but at the same time, we also need to be starting to put efforts into developing these plans and being prepared. So I think that's not the case for all cities. I think some cities are struggling just to deal with COVID, but others we're seeing that there's a desire and a need for support and financial support and climate finance to help them develop these climate action plans, and also start implementing actions that need to help them build this resilience within their cities. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, brilliant. Now I would like to maybe link with let's say the international context and the COP26, which is starting in 1 month now. Because this COP26 is really important because it's also the moment of reevaluation of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are basically the plans, the climate plans of countries in order to put into practice the Paris Agreement, which was agreed in already 6 years ago. And we know that the NDCs sometimes do not take into account local governments. So I wanted to ask you maybe what are the expectations from African local governments' point of view for this COP26?
So I think a big thing for our local governments is to see that climate finance flows to a local level. I think the reality is that national governments are seeing the important role of local governments in the implementation of the NDCs. National governments cannot implement the NDCs alone. They need local governments. They need to ensure that local governments' action plans are aligned with the NDC to ensure that the NDC is implemented at a local level. And therefore, I think a lot of local governments are hoping that out of COP comes this assurance that climate finance will flow to a local level and not necessarily just to a national level. I think this is a huge part of it, and that there's climate finance dedicated to adaptation and resilience, not just to mitigation. I think we know on the African continent that resilience and adaptation is crucial. So I think the fact that there's a need for finance to flow into both resilience and adaptation on the African continent is going to be a key thing that our local governments are hoping for.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. Yeah, very clear the importance of channeling climate finance to the local level, and this balance, always this balance between resilience and adaptation. We know how important adaptation is also at the African level, and how little are the funds dedicated to climate adaptation still. So now I'm gonna give the floor to the next speaker, Shivam Gai, Policy and Advocacy Officer at SLOCAT. With Shivam, we will turn into a sector where climate change has become more and more involved, and especially since 2018, which is the mobility and transport sector. We will be also hearing from Charlène Kwasi a little later about the work we do in Africa as climate change, and there is this coalition on mobility and transport. But before, let's hear from an international and multi-stakeholder ecosystem, which has been powering the sustainable low carbon transport revolution since its creation in 2009, the SLOCAT partnership. Climate change also very recently officially joined the partnership, the SLOCAT partnership. So we are delighted to have you here with us today. Thank you for being here, Shivam. So SLOCAT recently released the second edition of the Transport and Climate Change Global Status Report. Could you please begin by sharing with us some findings of this report on the Africa section?
Certainly, and again, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Climate Change being SLOCAT's newest partner, it's an honor, really. So as was just mentioned, it's my pleasure to be here today, and I thank the organizers for hosting the event and of course for having me. So the goal here is to give you all a brief but informative presentation on the SLOCAT key product, the TCJSR. The goal of this report is to tell the global and regional stories of where we are and where we need to get to urgently act on climate action in the transport sector. With contributions from more than 150 world-class experts, we managed to create this report as a one-stop shop for the latest available data. Of course, I'll be sharing details on where to find this at the end. So with that, let me jump into the said data. So to begin with car ownership trends, of course, this presentation being a transport and mobility focused data. Rapid urbanization trends in Africa have continued in 2019 and 2020. The region's megacities, mostly being in West Africa, are expected to represent all of the world's top 10 growing cities by 2035. Previously, and as commonly known, car ownership has remained low by global standards, with only 38 cars per 1,000 people in 2015. Motorized transport volumes in Africa were the lowest among the world's regions. However, if we take a look at this slide here, where you can see the change in car ownership in Africa, rates are rising, and they're rising rapidly, with some countries experiencing growth of 250% or more from the duration of 2005 to 2015. So quite staggering exponential numbers. Increased car ownership is driven largely by used vehicle imports from other regions, other global north countries, accounting for up to 95% of registrations in some countries. To focus a bit on the demand side of transport and mobility in Africa, there is a rapid increase in motorcycles on two-wheelers, which are used as taxis in both urban and rural areas, and transport a huge 80% of passengers and goods on rural roads. The African two-wheeler market is predicted to grow at 12% annually until 2025. An example of this being Rwanda, where motorcycle numbers have increased 8.5% annually from 2004 to 2017. The paratransit sector, of course, comprising of minibuses, taxis, motorcycles, has filled the gap left by limited public transport options in these African cities, hence the rapid growth. Freight transport faces significant infrastructure gaps, resulting in relatively low levels of intra-regional trade, only to be exacerbated, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic, in which there is now a 32 to 50% decrease in transport freight activity. As for walking and cycling, the numbers remain quite unique. Globally, more than 1/3 of all trips are made by foot or by bicycle. However, in some African cities, walking and cycling account for more than 70% of all personal trips. Walking and cycling undoubtedly has an intrinsic benefits for populations, to name one being health. However, the reality of the number of 70%, it leaves Africa with issues such as the highest rate of road fatalities, with nearly 40% of these deaths involving pedestrians and the other 4 cyclists. To focus specifically on CO2 emissions, of course, they've increased in African region 27% from 2010 to 2019. Transport emissions in the region growing rapidly, but from a low baseline. And that's kind of a key point I want to make here. So if we take a look at the change in this data, only 15% of African countries actually exceeded the global average per capita transport emissions during 2010 to 2019. However, nearly 3/4 of African countries reported above global average emission growth. In response to this aforementioned data and facts, policy measures are still in need for rapid transformation in order to reach where we need to be. Improving access to low carbon transport in Africa will continue to depend on national and private actions. Due to a general lack of regional cooperation enabling these sustainable planning modes, and given the relatively small share of investments into transport in Africa, I believe it's only 5.6% of the region's FDI portfolio. The strongest opportunities to improve sustainable transport are likely low-cost, innovative, sustainable transport approaches that focus on planning, regulation, and small-scale information technology solutions that fit the region's needs specifically. Transport measures enacted since 2018 include an increase in comprehensive planning and growth, but still insufficient attention to walking and cycling. They include expansion on bus rapid transit systems and the integration of digital tech. Efforts to map and improve the routing of paratransit services are also made significant strides in recent years. Additionally, public transport reforms contributed to making formalized transport more viable for several African countries, leading to numerous benefits for those cities. Lastly, to, of course, mention the COVID-19 pandemic is something that we can't ignore. We are all aware of the fact that this pandemic has created some nuanced challenges for us. And with these challenges, they require some nuanced thinking in response. The fact is that African countries have been heavily impacted by COVID-19. As was shared in the first 2 presentations, I have to completely agree. While climate change is a huge focus for everyone, if we ignore the reality of the pandemic and what comes with it, we can never truly reach what is considered climate justice. And yeah, that is what I wanted to present to you all here today. Thank you for listening. I hope this information was helpful, insightful. And of course, if you would like to see more and find a one-stop shop for all your data needs, whether that be globally based on NDCs and global transport action or African specific, please visit www.tcc-gsr.com. I will also place it in the chat if anyone needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting data, Shivam. Yeah, it shows the challenges, many challenges that African cities are facing because yeah, we can see that the demand is growing so fast that if we don't face those challenges seriously as a systemic, like in a systemic way, it will get quite complicated. These figures about the per capita CO2 emissions is really interesting also to look at, especially if you put it in parallel with how rapidly the cities are growing and spreading with a huge demand on transport. I wanted to ask you then, with all of that, all of this in mind, since SLOCAT is a huge partnership and carries lots of voices, let's say, and I know that SLOCAT is organizing like a delegation to COP26. What is SLOCAT as a mobility community expecting from COP26? And for example, for African actors who are having difficulties to even be present at COP26, how is it going within your community that you represent of experts on transport?
Thank you for that question. Yes, as mentioned, SLOCAT is a partnership of over 100 organizations, and we serve as the co-focal point to the UNFCCC on transport. And COP26 is imminent, and we're facing some nuanced challenges, as I said, that come with it, right? Challenges that we could say are exposing some very deep flaws within our global system. However, in this time of action, we have to seize the opportunity that's only 1 month away. Facing this adversity together as a community, as a transport community, we need to guarantee that our policy and advocacy for our sector is visible in spaces at COP26, right? We need to assure that transport decarbonization is included at all levels at COP, whether that be from a dialogue perspective, national, local, private, the innovation sectors, and of course, across all regions. And it's to assure that these messages that we're passing along here today or at your summit or in general, they're not lost, they're not filtered through the discourses that tend to happen at COP. So it's to assure there's a dialogue across stakeholders, using our existing data and translating that into knowledge products, and then lastly, of course, coupling that with strong policy and advocacy. As for Africa and the African region, the hope is that the region is respected equally. This is not just in terms of the visibility that I was just speaking about, but understanding that accessibility is limited, as you just mentioned. We've been in very close contact with UNFCCC and spaces such as this regarding that, but things are out of control, are very nuanced. I keep using that word, but it's a very fitting word for what's going on. But of course, not to mention the next COP27 is going to be held in Africa as well, meaning that the presence is necessary. So my message to everyone here, specifically, of course, my transport community colleagues, what we're trying to do is try to make the process as easy as possible. So I will put the link in the Zoom chat. We've been gathering every single transport event that will be happening at COP into one place for all of you to access, whether that be in person or virtually. But the idea is to make sure as many stakeholders, especially within the African region, are represented fully.
Okay, thank you so much. And yeah, I encourage everyone to check this report and all the information you can find about SLOCAT. Very interesting work being done by SLOCAT. Now I want to give the floor to Charlène Kwasi, the director of the OMA, Observatory of African Mobilities. For something, maybe now let's go back to a more local level. It's really interesting what we have been doing with Charlène and climate change since 2018. The idea is basically that we have this coalition on mobility and transport, which takes a framework which was defined actually within the UNFCCC by Slowcat and moving on. So there is this framework called the Pbmc Global Roadmap, which aims at seeing how to decarbonize the transport sector. And we said, okay, let's take that framework, which is very global, and translate it into more local levels in African countries. And that's what this coalition, this climate change coalition, is doing since it's been already since 2017. So Morocco has its roadmap on sustainable transport. Côte d'Ivoire has it, and now we are starting the same process with Senegal. And today, Charlène is gonna tell us a bit more about the Ivorian roadmap, which is again the translation of like global tool which was imagined within the UNFCCC processes, becoming true at the level of a country such as Côte d'Ivoire. So thank you, Charlène, for your presence and for your participation.
Thank you, Romain, and thank you, Climate Change, for having me. Before I get into the subject, I will just introduce what we are doing as African Mobilities Observatory, Moving On Lab Africa, because this year we've actually entered this big sustainable mobility ecosystem, which is Moving On. And we are actually aiming to become an innovation ecosystem in which Moving On Lab members are working for sustainable mobility in Africa with African public and private actors in order to implement projects on the continent, led by actors who are actually interested in developing solutions to sustainable mobility. So basically, since 2017, we have been working with many African actors. And most recently, we have joined the Greater Abidjan Urban Mobility Authority through a permanent commission on sustainable mobility. And the goal is to share our expertise through events such as the Africa Climate Week or other international and national events, to work on diverse sectors of mobility. And meanwhile, we are co-constructing an ecosystem with big companies from the Moving On Lab, such as Allianz, for example, Renault, Kantar, Orange, and Climate Change is also part of this great ecosystem. And it allows all the actors who do not necessarily work together to collaborate or be inspired by diverse projects and experiences in the African continent, because we are convinced that we will be able to meet the SDGs and save the planet working within an ecosystem and not in silos or in different parts of the world. So thank you very much again for having me. And now I will actually introduce the experience that we have lived since 2019 now with Climate Change in Côte d'Ivoire. So the project of the roadmap for sustainable mobility of Côte d'Ivoire, yeah, you can go on with the next slide. Yeah, as Romain mentioned, is actually a very interesting process who actually have been involved multi-level stakeholders, thanks to driven by the Pbmc method that focuses originally on 8 axes, 8 would say subsectors of mobility that you can see here on the screen. And the goal for us was to refine this process, or actually adapt it to the Ivorian context with the major mobility stakeholders, And you can go on. So we've been working with a lot of actors, including mayors of cities, startups, companies, the Ministry of Transport, of course, who actually was involved, strongly involved in the process. And the goal was to address specific issues of mobility in different parts of the country, to address roadmap, a guideline that will help decision makers to build fairer policies, more inclusive and more sustainable policies for our mobility system in Côte d'Ivoire. And of course, as Romain mentioned also, as the process has been actually successful in Morocco and in Côte d'Ivoire, the goal is to replicate it in other cities of the continent. So after Morocco, we've initiated this interesting process, in a context where, and you can go on with the next slide. In the context where green gases emissions are at the highest rate that we have, and we face a car fleet that is actually pretty old and not respecting the safety regulations or even the respect of the users, simply. And we've worked also with IDRI, so the international, Institute, for Sustainable Development and International Relations, to actually modelize this roadmap to really see what would be the gain in green gases emissions if we actually implement and follow this roadmap. The next slide. And as I mentioned, this roadmap actually was initiated in a certain context, a context where the transport sector is dominated by the paratransit. It's one fact, and also by the transport of people and goods by road. So here you can see on the screen some of the mobility modes that are available in Abidjan. So the paratransit that we consider public, but ensured by buses and also water transport modes, which represents only less than 20% of the transport, the mobility share. So it's quite low. And we have also on the other side, the heart of transport and mobility in actually most cities in Africa, which are the minibuses, the shared taxis, the motorcycles, the three-wheelers as well. You can go, yeah. And this roadmap is also came in a good time, because mass transit projects were actually thought before and were actually reinforced or reaffirmed in this roadmap through the Abidjan Metro, for example, and the bus rapid transit. So two mass transit projects that will help fluidify the traffic in the city and also favor multimodality. You can go to the next slide. So this roadmap has some objectives that have been actually fulfilled. The first one being to set up an orientation framework. We know that the crucial need for governance is lacking in our African cities in general, or countries. And this roadmap actually helped a lot of major players to work together thanks to the PPMC tool and the actual work that we've been doing in different parts of the country to gather different kind of actors and work on a shared vision, which is important. And this process is also a good way to promote the work that has been doing and favor the, ask for financial or funding solutions. Because when a framework, when a work is shared and validated by the entire ecosystem, it makes it easier to be implemented on the ground. You can go on the next slide. So as I mentioned,
sorry, Charlene.
I don't know. It's too. I'm being too long. Okay, 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up. So basically, as I said, we started this process since 2019 with a lot of steps. So first, the identification of all the stakeholders, as I mentioned, and a diagnosis of mobility in Côte d'Ivoire. Then we had to to build this roadmap, identifying the main axes to work on. 8 were actually advised by the PPMC tool, but we chose in Côte d'Ivoire to add 2 more axes, which is road safety and education of users. You can go on the next slide. And then the next step had to be to gather all the actors in Abidjan, but not only, in 2 other cities of the country to actually talk about the needs and the specific needs of and characteristics, of mobility in the entire country. And now we are at the final step, and the roadmap should be ready in a few days to be handed over in a few months to the government officials of the country. So if we have some lessons or recommendations to address to invite other countries or other cities to take part in this process, would be that it has been beneficial and it has been really inspiring for the country. But it must be supported and monitored by the different actors, and especially the governments and the decision makers, to implement projects in order to be experimented and really make an impact on the ground. And the next step would be to replicate this process in the countries or the cities that really need it. Yeah, that will be all for me. Thank you very much for for listening.
Thank you, Charlene. Very interesting presentation, and I think it answers some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat of, for example, how to engage CSOs with the local governments and other actors. Actually, this is quite a good example, as you mentioned, of a dynamic of 2 years, 3 years involving CSOs, involving like from startups to associations to researchers to local governments, but also national governments. And then you have a shared framework, a shared strategy, which was developed in a bottom-up approach, but also with the involvement since day one of the national government, such as the Ministry of Transport or Ministry of Environment. So this is how to engage. It's this dynamic of, let's say, coalition and roadmaps. It's a way to do it, and then to have even access to funds, because you already have a base, a solid base of actors and a shared diagnosis and strategy. So really interesting to see that. And maybe, yeah, I wanted to ask you maybe in 30 seconds, since you have, you are an observatory, how, in your point of view, can we combine this such a fast, rapid development that was presented before by Shivam and climate action in the African context? Can you give us some kind of hints?
Actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, the best way to meet the demands and the needs of mobility of our African populations are to work together. The process that we've experienced with climate change is one of the way to put forward a common vision, to work on specific aspects, because it was, again, one of the limits of this roadmap is that it couldn't allow us to go forward in terms of experimentation and implementation of projects on the ground. But we have seen that this roadmap is, as you said, a strong base actually to work more on the strategy. The Urban Mobility Authority is already working with the roadmap to implement projects and even finance studies of exchange hubs for the city of Abidjan, thanks to the work that we've done. So it actually shows that if we involve a lot of non-state actors and actually multi-level actors in a process like this, it's valuable. It shows inclusivity and translated by sustainability. I mean, it's the good way. For me, the best way is to work in ecosystems.
Thank you, Charlene, for this feedback. So we are a bit running out of time now. So I would like now to give the floor to Abdelrahman Meleji from Transport for Cairo. Transport for Cairo is one of the recent new member of this coalition on mobility and transport. And we really appreciate you sharing information and best practices related to urban mobility in Africa here. Transport for Cairo was also selected as part of the pitch corner I was mentioning, so they sent us this video. You can check on our website. So without further introduction, Abdelrahman, can you please present us in a few words the Ghana Urban Mobility and Accessibility Project, GUMAP? Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Roman, for having me again. So GUMAP, in short, is a project that we're working on right now in Accra, Ghana. And the main focus of this project is to build capacity for the collection of data and the analysis on routes, on public transport, on the public transport network in Accra. We are working with the government of Ghana, specifically the departments of transport, in several MMAs, and we are building their capacity for them to own the process of data collection and analysis. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of that, but I think Roman, yeah, that's the project in short. This is what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to ask you the question. It's an easy question, but how, in your opinion, because you work a lot with digital tools, how digitalization, sorry, it's hard to say for a French speaker, digitalization can support a more sustainable mobility solutions for African cities?
Yeah, so it's a hard word for me as well. But so my understanding of digitalization is the process of first of having data, right, and then having this data in digital format. So how does that relate to climate change and the theme of this event? So when we're talking about African cities, so to us, I'm from Cairo, from Egypt. We see each African city as a special case, right? But they do share some similarities. So when I say the African context, I am talking about the similarities. So digitalization in the African context, it's not just another fancy word, because we have so many fancy words in tech like machine learning, big data, and this stuff, but it's actually something that is very applicable. So when it comes to public transport in African cities, like digitalization is very crucial to identify the problems, to first identify the problems, and then to address them. And if we are to talk about a small example, like for example, we have an African city that we've worked in before. The city has unemployment challenges. So people, unemployed people think the first option, they go and they share with each other and they buy a vehicle and they work in, on a public transport route. So in this case, we found out that there is a lot of oversupply. And when did we find out that there is oversupply? When we went in, collected the data, and started to see this pattern of too many vehicles working on specific routes. So what I'm trying to say here is, like, having an accurate digital representation of mobility will help identify such a problem, or even prevent it from happening, in the first place. Because if the person working on the regulation, giving away the licenses for routes, if they have this digital database, they know what's going on. So one last thing I want to add in relation to climate change specifically. We, as Transport for Cairo, we have what we call like a realistic vision of building like local capacity. And I want to stress on the word local for digitalization across Africa. So we don't want to come like with a consortium of other foreigners. We come to a city, we do some data collection and analysis, present the results to a government beneficiary, and then leave. So for example, Shivam guy, he showed us stats for example, on active travel in African cities. Now, we want each of our cities to be able to answer these questions and to have these insights. If we're asking a city representative, what is the percentage of active travel in your city, for example? So if a city is capable with the collection and analysis of data, this is the first step. The next level will be like the ability to build accurate models for mobility. So not just the complex forested transport model. I'm talking about also GHG modeling based on info, such as the routes of the network, the level of service of each route, what is the number and the model of vehicles on routes, what is their condition, and when cities are comfortable with basic digitalization, they will be able to see them adopting data-driven policy reforms. So in climate change or else.
Thank you so much. We are now reaching the end of this webinar, but you're giving me the opportunity to make one point, which was one of my points for this conclusion, which is the importance of that data access, absolutely strategic. And then when you have the data, you also need the capacity to analyze those data, and then based on that, implement, like design and then implement public policies. And most of the time, the problem is at the very beginning in terms of the data access. So it's something we really have to address. We are really now out of the time limit. I don't know if some of the speakers wanted to ask one more question, add something, because you turned on your cameras. No, it's okay. So thank you. Yeah, well, it's time for me for the conclusion. I will try to, I won't take long, but yeah, thank you to everyone for these brilliant inputs. The issues are more or less a bit the same. We still need direct access to finance at the local level. We see that there is a strong need also of a balance between adaptation and resilience, absolutely strategic in the African context. The question of solidarity is in many of your presentations also, so fair access to international arenas to have to guarantee good representation of points of view and of diversity. And so with these few words, I really thank you all. I hope that some of you will be present in Glasgow for next COP. If not, let's keep in touch through this channel of webinars. Even if it's not perfect, it still allows us to exchange good practices, information. So do not hesitate to follow our webinars. Again, I hope that we will be able to meet in person for the next Climate Change Summit in September 2022 in Dakar. And it will be a very important moment to really prepare and gather all the African messages before COP27, which will be held in Africa. We still don't know exactly where, but it will be on in the African continent by the end of 2022. So thank you all. Thank you thanks a lot to the participants, which were a lot today. And you can have access to the recording of this session on our website in the coming hours. Thank you all. Have a nice day, and see you soon in real life, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye, Romain.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Everyone, bye-bye.